The process of expanding the European Union through the accession of new member states began with the Inner Six, who founded the European Coal and Steel Community in 1952. Since then, the EU's membership has grown to 28, with the latest member state being Croatia, which joined in July 2013. The most recent territorial enlargement of the EU was the incorporation of Mayotte in 2014. The most notable territorial reductions of the EU, and its predecessors, were the exit of Algeria upon independence in 1962 and the exit of Greenland in 1982. Currently, accession negotiations are underway with several states. The process of enlargement is sometimes referred to as European integration. This term is also used to refer to the intensification of cooperation between EU member states as national governments allow for the gradual harmonization of national laws. To join the European Union, a state needs to fulfill economic and political conditions called the Copenhagen criteria, which require a stable democratic government that respects the rule of law, and its corresponding freedoms and institutions. According to the Maastricht Treaty, each current member state and the European Parliament must agree to any enlargement criteria. According to the EU treaties, membership of the European Union is open to any European state which respects the values referred to in Article 2 and is committed to promoting them. Those Article 2 values are respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. This is based on the 1993 Copenhagen criteria agreed as it became clear many former Eastern Bloc countries would apply to join. In December 1995, the Madrid European Council revised the membership criteria to include conditions for member country integration through the appropriate adjustment of its administrative structures. Since it is important that European Community legislation be reflected in national legislation, it is critical that the revised national legislation be implemented effectively through appropriate administrative and judicial structures. Finally, and technically outside the Copenhagen criteria, comes the further requirement that all prospective members must enact legislation to bring their laws into line with the body of European law built up over the history of the Union, known as the acquis communautaire process. Today the accession process follows a series of formal steps, from a pre-accession agreement to the ratification of the final accession treaty. These steps are primarily presided over by the European Commission, but the actual negotiations are technically conducted between the Union's member states and the candidate country. Before a country applies for membership, it typically signs an association agreement to help prepare the country for candidacy and eventual membership. Most countries do not meet the criteria to even begin negotiations before they apply, so they need many years to prepare for the process. An association agreement helps prepare for this first step. In the case of the Western Balkans, a special process, the stabilization and association process, exists to deal with the special circumstances there. When a country formally applies for membership, the Council asks the Commission to prepare an opinion on the country's readiness to begin negotiations. The Council can then either accept or reject the Commission's opinion. If the Council agrees to open negotiations, the screening process then begins. The Commission and candidate country examine its laws and those of the EU and determine what differences exist. The Council then recommends opening negotiations on chapters of law that it feels there is sufficient common ground to have constructive negotiations. Negotiations are typically a matter of the candidate country convincing the EU that its laws and administrative capacity are sufficient to execute European law, which can be implemented as seen fit by the member states. Often this will involve timelines before the acquis communautaire has to be fully implemented. A chapter is said to be closed when both sides have agreed it has been implemented sufficiently, however it can still be reopened if the Commission feels that the candidate has fallen out of compliance. To assess progress achieved by countries in preparing for accession to the European Union, the European Commission submits regular reports to the European Council. These serve as a basis for the Council to make decisions on negotiations or their extension to other candidates. Once the negotiations are complete, a treaty of accession will be signed, which must then be ratified by all of the member states of the Union, as well as the institutions of the Union, and the candidate country. Once this has been completed, it will join the Union on the date specified in the treaty. The entire process, from application for membership to membership, has typically taken about a decade, although some countries, notably Sweden, Finland, and Austria, have been faster, taking only a few years. The process from application for association agreement through accession has taken far longer, as much as several decades. Example: the following is an example of an accession process. This follows Estonia's journey to membership, as a recent example from the 2004 enlargement. However, the speed of accession depends on each state, how integrated it is with the EU beforehand, the state of its economy and public institutions, any outstanding political issues with the EU, and how much law to date the EU has built up that the acceding state must adopt. This outline also includes integration steps taken by the accession country after it attains membership. Succession fatigue. Enlargement has been one of the EU's most successful foreign policies, yet has equally suffered from considerable opposition from the start. French President Charles de Gaulle opposed British membership fearing US influence. A later French president François Mitterrand opposed Greek, Spanish and Portuguese membership fearing that the former dictatorships were not ready and it would reduce the Union to a free trade area. The reasons for the first member states to apply, and for them to be accepted, were primarily economic, while the second enlargement was more political. The southern Mediterranean countries had just emerged from dictatorships and wanted to secure their democratic systems through the EEC, while the EEC wanted to ensure the same thing and that their southern neighbors were stable and aligned to NATO. These two principal forces, economic gain and political security, have been behind enlargement since. However, with the recent large enlargements in 2004, public opinion in Europe has turned against further expansion. It has also been acknowledged that enlargement has its limits. The EU cannot expand endlessly. Former Commission President Romano Prodi favored granting everything but institutions to the EU's neighbor states, allowing them to cooperate deeply while not adding strain on the EU's institutional framework. This has in particular been pushed by France and Germany as a privileged partnership for Turkey, membership for which has faced considerable opposition on cultural and logistical grounds. Historical enlargements. Founding members. The European Coal and Steel Community was proposed by Robert Schuman in his declaration on May 9, 1950, and involved the pooling of the coal and steel industries of France and West Germany. Half of the project states, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, had already achieved a great degree of integration between themselves with the organs of Benelux and earlier bilateral agreements. These 5 countries were joined by Italy, and they all signed the Treaty of Paris on July 23, 1952. These 6 members, dubbed the Inner Six, went on to sign the Treaties of Rome, establishing 2 further communities, together known as the European Communities, when they merged their executives in 1967. In 1962, Spain, ruled by the military dictator Francisco Franco, issued its first attempt to join the European Communities. Spanish Foreign Affairs Minister Fernando Maura Acaschala sent the request form to French Prime Minister Maurice Couve de Merville. This request was rejected by all the member countries in 1964. Spain was not a democracy at the time, and thus unable to enter the EEC. The community did see some loss of territory due to the decolonialization occurring in their era. Algeria, which was an integral part of France, had a special relationship with the community. Algeria gained independence on July 5, 1962, and hence left the community. There was no enlargement until the 1970s. First enlargement, the United Kingdom, which had refused to join as a founding member, changed its policy following the Suez Crisis and applied to be a member of the communities. The UK and US were concerned about France attempting to usurp US leadership in Europe, and the US encouraged the UK to join to counterbalance French influence. Other EEC members were also inclined to British membership on those grounds. French President Charles de Gaulle feared Britain's US influence and vetoed British membership. Once de Gaulle had left office, the door to enlargement was once again opened. The EEC economy had also slowed down, and British membership was seen as a way to revitalise the community. Only after a 12-hour talk between British Prime Minister Edward Heath and French President Georges Pompidou took place did Britain's third application succeed. After Britain was accepted, Prime Minister Edward Heath said, "For my part, I have no doubt at all that the discussions which we have had will prove of real and lasting benefit, not only to Britain and France, but to Europe as a whole." As part of the deal for British entry, France agreed to allow the EEC its own monetary resources. However, France made that concession only as Britain's small agriculture sector would ensure that Britain would be a net contributor to the common agricultural policy-dominated EEC budget. Applying together with the UK, as on the previous occasions, were Denmark, Ireland, and Norway. These countries were so economically linked to the UK that they considered it necessary to join the EEC if the UK did. However, the Norwegian government lost a national referendum on membership and hence did not accede with the others on January 1, 1973. Gibraltar, a British overseas territory, joined the community with the United Kingdom at this point, as can be seen in the long title of the UK European Communities Act 1972. Mediterranean enlargements. The next enlargement would occur for different reasons. The 1970s also saw Greece, Spain, and Portugal emerge from dictatorship. These countries desired to consolidate their new democratic systems by binding themselves into the EEC. Equally, the EEC was unsure about which way these countries were heading and wanted to ensure stability along its southern borders. However, for an accession, Mitterrand initially opposed their membership, fearing they were not ready and it would water the community down to a free trade area. Greece joined the EU in 1981, followed by Spain and Portugal in 1986. The year 1985, however, saw the only time a territory had voted to leave the community, when Greenland was granted home rule by Denmark and the territory used its new powers and voted to withdraw from the community. Morocco and Turkey applied for membership in 1987. Morocco's application was turned down as it was not considered European, while Turkey's application was considered eligible on the basis of the 1963 Ankara Association Agreement, but the opinion of the Commission on the possible candidate status was by then negative. Turkey received candidate status only in 1999 and began official membership negotiations in 2004. Which are still in progress as of 2013. Post-Euro Cold War. After the 1970s, Europe experienced a downturn which led to leaders launching of the Single European Act, which set to create a single market by 1992. The effect of this was that EFTA states found it harder to export to the EEC and businesses wished to relocate within the new single market, making the downturn worse for EFTA. EFTA states began to discuss closer links with the EEC despite its domestic unpopularity. Austria, Finland and Sweden were neutral in the Cold War, so membership of an organization developing a common foreign and security policy would be incompatible with that. With the end of the Cold War in 1989, that obstacle was removed, and the desire to pursue membership grew stronger. On October 3, 1990, the reunification of East and West Germany brought East Germany into the community without increasing the number of member states. The community later became the European Union in 1993 by virtue of the Maastricht Treaty, and established standards for new entrants so their suitability could be judged. These Copenhagen criteria stated in 1993 that a country must be a democracy, operate a free market, and be willing to adopt the entire body of EU law already agreed upon. Also in 1993 the European Economic Area was established with the EFTA states except Switzerland. Most of the new EEA states pursued full EU membership as the EEA did not sufficiently satisfy the needs of their export-based corporations. The EU has also preferred these states to integrate via the EEA rather than full membership, as the EEC wished to pursue monetary integration and did not wish for another round of enlargement to occupy their attention. However, with the EEA's credibility dented following rejection by businesses and Switzerland, the EU agreed with full membership. This was more readily accepted with the prospect of poorer countries wishing to join. Contributions from richer countries would help balance the EU budget. On January 1, 1995, Austria, Finland, and Sweden acceded to the EU, marking its fourth enlargement. The Norwegian government lost a second national referendum on membership. 2004 and 2007 Eastern enlargements. As with the Mediterranean countries in the 1980s, the former communist countries in Central and Eastern Europe had emerged from dictatorships and wanted to consolidate their democracies. They also wanted to join the project of European integration and ensure they did not fall back into the Russian sphere of influence. The EU and NATO offered a guarantee of this, and the EU was also seen as vital to ensuring the economic success of those countries. The EU's desire to accept these countries' membership applications was however less than rapid. The collapse of communism came quickly and was not anticipated. The EU struggled to deal with the sudden reunification of Germany with the addition of its poorer 17 million people and, while keeping its monetary union project on track, it was still at that early stage pointing the EFTA countries in the direction of the EEA rather than full membership. The former communist states persisted and eventually the above-mentioned issues were cleared. The US also pressured the EU to offer membership as a temporary guarantee. It feared expanding NATO too rapidly for fear of frightening Russia. Although eventually trying to limit the number of members, and after encouragement from the US, the EU pursued talks with 10 countries and a change of mind by Cyprus and Malta helped to offset slightly the influx of large poorer member states from Central and Eastern Europe. In the end, 8 Central and Eastern European countries, plus 2 Mediterranean countries were able to join on May 1, 2004. This was the largest single enlargement in terms of people, and number of countries, though not in terms of GDP. The less developed nature of these countries was of concern to some of the older member states, who placed temporary restrictions on the rights of work of the citizens of these states to their countries. The movement westward of some of the labor force of the newly acceded countries that occurred in the aftermath of the enlargement initially spawned culture copyrighters among the public opinion and media of some Western countries, despite the generally conceded benefit to the economies concerned. The official EU media frequently referred to the enlargement of the CEE region as an historical opportunity, and morally imperative, which reflected the desire of the EU to admit these countries as members, even though they were less developed than the Western European countries. Following this, Romania and Bulgaria, though were deemed initially as not fully ready by the Commission to join in 2004, acceded nevertheless on January 1, 2007. These, like the countries joining in 2004, faced a series of restrictions as to their citizens not fully enjoying working rights on the territory of some of the older EU members for a period up to 7 years of their membership. Western Balkans enlargements. The 2003 European Council Summit in Thessaloniki set integration of the Western Balkans as a priority of EU expansion. The EU's relations with the Western Balkan states were moved from the external relations to the enlargement policy segment in 2005. Those states which have not been recognized as candidate countries are considered potential candidate countries. The move to Enlargement Directorate was a consequence of the advancement of the stabilization and association process. Albania and the several successor states of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia have all adopted EU integration as an aim of foreign policy. Slovenia joined the EU during the first wave of the fifth enlargement on May 1, 2004. Croatia joined on July 1, 2013, following ratification of the 2011 accession treaty by all other EU countries. Detail, timeline. Future enlargement. Article 49 of the Maastricht Treaty says that any European state that respects the principles of liberty, democracy, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law, may apply to join the Union. The Copenhagen European Council set out the conditions for EU membership in June 1993 in the so-called Copenhagen criteria. The Western Balkan states had to sign stabilization and association agreements before applying for membership. Albania, Iceland, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Turkey are all recognized as official candidates, and the latter three are undergoing membership talks. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo are recognized as potential candidates for membership by the EU. Bosnia has concluded a SAA which is undergoing ratification and is preparing an application for EU membership. while Kosovo has completed negotiations on their SAA. The Western Balkans have been prioritized for membership since emerging from war during the breakup of Yugoslavia. Turkey has been seeking membership since the 1980s, and Iceland lodged its application following an economic collapse in 2008. Switzerland applied for membership in May 1992 but subsequently froze their application, and Norway has applied 3 times but withdrew its application each time, most recently in 1992. The EU may also acquire new outermost regions in 2015 due to the integration of 3 Caribbean islands into the Netherlands following the dissolution of the Netherlands Antilles in 2010. Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia have expressed European aspirations. All 3 countries signed association agreements on June 27, 2014, which deepened their trade and political links with the EU, however, without prospect of eventual membership. In July 2014, Jean-Claude Juncker, the President-elect of the European Commission, announced that the EU has no plans to expand in the next 5 years. See also, countries bordering the European Union, enlargement of the Eurozone, enlargement of NATO, future enlargement of the European Union, Treaty of Accession 2003, Treaty of Accession 2005, Treaty of Accession 2011, Union for the Mediterranean, withdrawal from the European Union, European Free Trade Association, Switzerland and the European Union, Schengen Area, references. External links, Enlargement a Europa, European Union member states and applicant countries a Euro CVCE.